French peas, they showed up first in Dave the Giant Pickle. Yes, in the scene where most of the characters were actually created specifically to fit a role in a story. So I want to tell a story of David and Goliath. So you pull out your Bible and you read it and you actually pay attention this time. Because it's like, I turn this into a story, I want to tell it right. And it starts out when they would have wars, the two armies would line up on opposing hills on either side of a valley, and they would yell at each other. That's how they started, and so you read that, and that just struck me as funny. Like they just stood and yelled, like, why I oughta, why are you gonna get it? No, your mama. That's what they yelled. And what it made me think of was, if you've ever seen, and I'm not endorsing this film either, I'm here to endorse no films, Monty Python's The Holy Grail. The Frenchman on the top of the castle wall, holding down the most bizarre insults ever at the Englishman, and just how obnoxious an obnoxious Frenchman is. And I thought, okay, I'm going to make the Philistines French. But I don't have like just a whole bunch of random characters around. What would be the easiest possible character I could make that I could make a lot of? And I thought, peas! It's easy to make peas, they're just a ball. I can make a ton of peas. And the French peas were born to play the role of the annoying Frenchman yelling insults at the Israelites. The Israelites don't insult back because I thought it would be funnier if they just stood there saying, why are we doing this? Why are you raising your hand? The Q&A is after the show.
Wait, no proof?
Where did the slime come from?
The slime? What? Oh, the slushies. The slushies? That came from their cups. Oh, why? I don't know. It struck me as funny. There's something that you do just because you find that something tickles you. What is there? Because they're walking around, they're marching around. Like, okay, I got these vegetables marching around this wall, over and over again. You got to watch it. What can happen while they're doing that? Did we just watch them march? And what are these annoying French peas? What would they do while they're? And I thought, oh, they drop slushies on there. If you get all sticky or out in the sun, then that'd be really annoying. That'd be a really annoying thing to do, right? That's practically the worst thing you can imagine. But it's a kids show. I can't have them like boiling oil.
You're scarred for life.
I had someone complain about the movie Jonah because they said it was heresy because we misrepresented the sin of the Ninevites as fish slapping. And they wrote, the Ninevites engaged in child sacrifice. They did, and you had this whole list of what the Assyrians actually did that was terrible and worthy of judgment. It's like, are you forgetting this was a children's movie? I mean, you can say that for the Quentin Tarantino version. I'm doing the Dr. Seuss version. So, if I have to be labeled a heretic for sparing the children, just cross the bear. Okay, so what are we talking about? We're talking about burdens. I've been speaking a lot. I didn't know I'm shy. I'm a really introverted guy. That's why I'm an animator, because I don't like to be up in front of people. But I've gotten used to it because, I had to promote VeggieTales. I had to go out and I'll practice. I'll try to get better at this because it's important. And I discovered, well, it's actually kind of fun. When you get an audience, because it's like doing puppets with kids. I used to do puppets with kids in Bible college. We were on the puppet team because we were such rebels. So if you want to join the fraternity or do you want to join the puppet team? Puppet team! That's nice! The parties and the hazing and this great stuff we did with puppets. Man, awesome. Why did I tell that story? There was a point. And so slushies were the obvious choice. Oh, I remember. We put on a puppet show once. As a puppet, you can hide, but entertain. Hide, entertain. See, introvert, extrovert simultaneously. It's the tension of my existence. So we would set up the stage. So what did we would go to, strange little Baptist churches in northern Minnesota. It was very bizarre. I met in a band filled with puppets. And we did one show at a home for disabled kids, for like mentally handicapped kids. And we're putting on the show, and then you realize mentally handicapped kids don't have the same sense of boundary as normal kids. So you're doing this, and in the middle of the show, you see two hands grab and pull it off. I don't think they know the rules. Very, very fun. Burnout. So I've been speaking a lot more. Often randomly and at great length. But I've been speaking a lot at children's ministry conferences. At children's ministry conferences, you've got there's 2,000 Sunday school teachers basically in a big ballroom, and you're supposed to go talk to them. And you look, or I also speak to like Christian film conferences where up and coming, I want to be a Christian filmmaker. These people are packed into a room, and you notice that they share something in common, that they all look kind of tired. Because Sunday school teachers, if you think about it, they're locked in the basement with 2-year-olds. No one ever hears about what they're doing unless it goes poorly. And then everyone hears about it. They don't get a whole lot of thanks. You see a lot of burnout in the faces of long-time children's ministry workers. And Christian filmmakers, this may come as a surprise to you, but the vast majority of Christian filmmakers have never actually made a film. It's because it's hard. It's hard to make a film because films are expensive and you have to go talk someone into giving you a ridiculous amount of money that you'll probably never see again. And most creatives are not good at asking people for money. And most creatives, if you had money and they asked you for it, you wouldn't give it to them. Because they're creatives and they don't know how to handle money. So these two groups are both, they look fatigued. So as I speak, I notice that they kind of remind me of me about 10 years ago, in the middle of the height of VeggieTales, when everything from the outside appeared to be going absolutely wonderfully. We finished, I think it was Madame Blueberry. Madame Blueberry was a sad Blueberry. She lived in her house in the trees, blah, blah, blah. And sales had just started to really take off. It was the first time it was like, this is actually working. This is so awesome. We don't have to worry about whether we're going to have enough money to make the next one. It was working, so our distributor down in Nashville, we were in Chicago, the distributor was Public Word Music in Nashville. They sent up their executives to officially hand over the new video and celebrate by taking us all out to lunch in downtown Chicago. And it was a great, it was a great celebration of the success God was giving us. But as I drove home from lunch, I started to get chest pain. And because of my kind of stoic Swedish heritage, I ignore all medical issues as long as possible. And I went home, ignored it, went to bed, ignored it. About 2 o'clock in the morning, I could not sleep. There was so much pressure in my chest that seemed to be getting worse that I decided, okay, I gotta do something. So I got up, got in the car, and drove myself to the emergency room. Didn't tell my wife. If you're not married yet, I wouldn't recommend this. If you think you might be having a heart attack, you should probably tell your wife. So went to the emergency room, and within about 60 seconds, found myself lying flat on my back on a gurney under a sign in the ER ward that said critical. And I remember lying there looking up and thinking, in my lighthearted way, I wonder why that says critical. That's a funny sign for me. I'm not critical, I'm a very positive person. And the nurse came by, and so I said, why does that say critical? And she looked at me and said, because you're critical. And she turned and walked away. And I could tell by her tone that she wasn't joking. It wasn't like a funny joke. By the time they got a cardiologist awake, whoever was on call, it was like 3 in the morning, they got him awake, he looked at the EKG, and said, I don't think he's having a heart attack. So do this test, do that test, they did all sorts of stuff. And came back and said, you have pericarditis. Pericarditis, if you're a nurse, you're aware of this. It's an infection in the area around your heart, in the lining, the sac of fluid basically around your heart. It gets an infection in it and starts to fill up with fluid. And if you don't catch it, eventually it fills up and it stretches your heart until it can't beat anymore, which they tell me is bad. If you're keeping score at home. But that is a bad category. But if they catch it, they give you a massive dose of antibiotics and you spend a couple of weeks on your back and you recover. And I recovered. And I came back in with my wife to meet with the doctor on a follow-up. And my wife, of course, is curious and says, so why do you get pericarditis? How does that happen? You get an infection. Why is it in your sinuses? Why is it in your heart? And the doctor looked at me and then looked at her and said, is he under much stress? I was under so much stress, it was almost killing me. The next year I got strep throat. The year after that I got shingles. I was 31. Shingles is an infection of your nervous system that usually affects the very old or the very frail. I was definitely the latter and was quickly becoming the former. I was under so much stress that I finally started seeing a Christian counselor. Just wanted to talk this through, see what's going on with me. I feel like I'm falling apart. I'm just miserable. And one of the days I went to talk to the counselor happened to be the day of the Columbine shooting. And I remember sitting in the car listening to the news on the radio right before I walked in. I was in the parking lot of the counselor. And I walked in, I said, have you heard the latest? Have you heard how bad it is? And he looked at me and said, yeah, I've heard. And he could see how really upset I was. And he said, well, what are you feeling? And I thought about it. My first thought was, well, it's terrible. Everyone should be feeling what, but then I thought, no, specifically, what am I feeling? And I thought about it for a second, and then I said, I could have done something. And I tried to express it to him. Because I'm here, God has put me here to create media that offsets the negative media that's coming out of Hollywood. And the boys that did this, were undoubtedly seriously affected by the media, by the violence, by just the lack of care about human life in the media. And that's why I'm here, is to stop that. So if I had done more faster, this wouldn't have happened. And the counselor stared at me for a bit and said, wow, that's quite a burden to carry. I said, yeah, it is. I was carrying an immense burden to save the world, to make a difference, to offset the evil streaming out of Hollywood into living rooms across the country, to do as much as I could, as fast as I could. It was the first thing I thought about every morning when I got up. It was the last thing I thought about at night before I went to bed. And it was making me miserable. It was killing me. I was not a happy person. And then something interesting happened. I was sitting in bed one night reading Paul's letter to the Galatians. And he goes through the list of the fruit of the Spirit. And, we all know that. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. But for the first time, it really struck me what Paul meant by this. I was familiar with the fruit of the Spirit, but I think, to be honest, I always looked at it as homework, as an obligation, a duty. If you are a Christian, you have to act loving, you have to act joyful, you have to be kind and patient and self-controlled. I looked at it like homework. Oh, great, something else I have to do after I finish saving the children from the evils of Hollywood. But now I saw what Paul really meant. If you are filled with the Spirit, these attributes will flow out of you whether you want them to or not. For an apple tree, producing apples is not an obligation. No apple tree ever accidentally produces grapes and then says, oh, I'm such an idiot. An apple tree produces apples for the simple fact that it is an apple tree. It can't be helped. In the same way, the Holy Spirit produces the fruit of the Spirit in a believer because he is the Holy Spirit. If someone is filled with the Spirit, these attributes will fall out of them effortlessly and naturally. It isn't homework. It can't be avoided. I turned to my wife and said something that startled her. I don't think I'm a Christian. Not what she expected to hear from her creator of VeggieTales husband. I read the fruit of the Spirit and it said, none of these are coming out of me. I'm not joyful. I have no peace. I'm not filled with love. I am stressed. I am cranky. I am fatigued. I am anxious. And none of those are on the list. Something is wrong with me. Something was wrong with me, but I didn't know what. Now, if you're here this morning and you heard the first part of my story, you know what happened next. This is about the time we were sued. Ended up in a lawsuit with a former distributor. Lost the lawsuit. Yeah, ironic, I didn't mention this morning. Lost the lawsuit, had to go into bankruptcy. Everything was sold to a company in New York. The creditors then appealed the lawsuit, and the appeals court took 1 hour to throw it out. So the lawsuit was actually thrown out, but everything had already been sold, so nothing could be undone. So, which was nice because it was clear we weren't guilty of wrongdoing, but kind of ironic because I still lost everything. So this was right about the time where my world fell apart. I lost my business, my characters, my ministry, the edifice I had built around myself, my means for making a difference, for saving the world. God stood back and let it all fall away. And then he showed me what I had done, how I had made the work I was doing for him more important than my relationship with him. He showed me how miserable I had become, how I was carrying this burden, dragging this rock uphill that he never intended me to carry. A burden, in fact, that only he could carry. Only one person has ever walked the earth who could actually save the world, and his name wasn't Phil. So I gave up that burden. I let it go. I put down the rock I had heaved for so long, and I rested. I read the Bible, and I prayed, and I felt God's love for me. A love so strong, he was willing to let everything I was doing for him fall apart to save me from myself. That freaked me out. The great works I was doing for God weren't as important to him as I was. Wow. Then pretty soon the fruit of the Spirit started to emerge. Like daffodils poking up through the snow. I felt peace. I felt joy. I felt love. My wife noticed. She liked it. I spent a few months like this after the class of my ministry, resting, reading the Bible, feeling God's love for me. I wrote a couple of children's books, one about God's love, but I didn't do much else. I sort of felt like an executive after a nervous breakdown, recovering at home, shuffling around the house in slippers and a bathrobe, drinking coffee, waving at the neighbors with a goofy grin on his face. Or like a star race car driver in rehab after some horrific wreck, sitting at home with a plastic Fisher-Price steering wheel. Right. And I thought, is this it? Am I done now? Will I just spend the rest of my life writing a few children's books, shuffling around in my slippers? It was great not to feel so burdened, but was this it? And then something happened at the park. I had taken a small office walking distance from my house in downtown Wheaton, Illinois, right near Wheaton College, if you know where that is. I'm sure you all do. You get up to that area often, I'm sure. We have Wendy's too, but they don't have coffee. I haven't made it that far north yet. What was I saying? I need a drink. Does anyone need a drink? I'll share mine. Thanks. You. Are you allowed to drink Diet Coke? No. Let me tell you about this park. You'll thirsty together. Tea, I could have said nothing. Drink. Can you help me? So there's a park. There's my office. Looks like you can help me. And so I would go in the springtime, it was really pretty, it was warm out, and I would go walk to a deli, and then shuffle down to this park in my bathrobe and my slippers with a sandwich, and sit on a bench in the park and eat my sandwich. It was so calm, it was so peaceful, and the trees were in bloom, and it was just, the peace of God and the fruit of the Spirit. And then one day I was sitting there in my bathrobe eating my sandwich, and two little girls ran through the park. They were sisters, like 3 and 5. And they were climbing on benches, and they were going around the fountain, and they were, doing stuff. And then their mom came along behind them, a young mom, pushing the stroller, trying to keep up, trying to keep them safe, trying to keep them out of trouble. And my heart went out for her, because I know I have girls. My girls are, one's now married, one's in high school. And I know what she is up against. I know what the world has in store for those girls. I know that it will seem like a heartbeat, and those girls will go from Gymboree to Abercrombie and Fitch. They will go from Blue's Clues to Jersey Shore. Like that. They'll go from milk to Diet Coke, And I wanted to help her. And I thought, what could I do to help that mom with those girls? And I thought, we live in such a brand obsessed culture. What if I could create some kind of a media brand that she could trust completely? And instantly it occurred to me, well, that's what Big Idea was supposed to be. That's why I started in the first place. And in an instant, all of the lawyers and the marketing meetings and the HR disasters and the layoffs and the bankruptcy, all of it just evaporated. And I could see all the way back to the beginning, to the purity of this call God put on my heart to tell the stories He gave me to help moms raise their kids. I felt a burden for this mom. And I thought, well, wait a minute. You just spent 6 months getting me to lay this burden down. Are you telling me I'm supposed to pick it up again? I was really confused. So I went back to Paul, this guy who's talking about, peace and joy and love. The guy who wrote Philippians, the book of joy, who says, rejoice, 100 times. Rejoice. Again, I say, rejoice. I thought, okay, Paul, Mr. Rejoice, what was your life like? In 2 Corinthians, he writes, 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I've been constantly on the move. I've been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my own countrymen, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, danger at sea. We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. That sounds miserable. Why wasn't Paul miserable like me? Why wasn't he sitting in a therapist's office saying, I can't keep doing this? How could he be filled with peace, joy, and love in the midst of everything he was describing? So now I was really curious, and I started reading. I actually went through all of his letters, everything he wrote, looking for clues. I found a clue in the book of Colossians, in the first chapter, where he says, we proclaim Him, Christ, admonishing and teaching everyone with all wisdom so that we may present everyone perfect in Christ. I thought, okay, me too, Paul, I'm with you there. To this end I labor, struggling with all my energy. And I thought, yeah, me too, and it's killing me. And I thought, well, wait a minute, I misread that verse. To this end I labor, struggling with all His energy, which so powerfully works in me. Well, that's curious. So maybe the reason Paul isn't burnt out and fatigued and half dead is because all the work he's doing, he's not doing with his own energy. He's doing it with Christ's energy. Okay, how exactly does that work? To the church in Galatians, he writes, Galatians 2:20, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. Galatians 6:14, he says, may I never boast except in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom the world has been crucified to me, and I to the world. So it occurred to me that what Paul seemed to be saying is that he's not using his own energy because he's dead. Instead, he is alive through Christ, and it is Christ's energy that is doing all this work and doing all this struggling. And Paul can have peace and joy and love in the middle of all this really difficult stuff. Is Paul loony? Did Jesus know about this? Do you know what Paul's saying? Well, let's take it to the big guy himself. Okay, the gospel writer Mark talks about Jesus looking out at a crowd of ordinary people. And Jesus says, and he who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. What does it mean to take up your cross and follow Christ? That, my response as a modern American says, awesome, where are we going? Hope it's fun. If you lived in first century Palestine and you heard the phrase, take up your cross, you knew exactly where you were going. You were going to die. What Jesus is saying is, come on, follow me, we're all going to die. It is the most peculiar invitation I think anyone has given to a large crowd of people. Where are you going when you're called to take up your cross and follow Christ? To die. We lose our lives. We let go of them. Jesus continues by saying, he who has found his life will lose it. And he who has lost his life for my sake will find it. Jesus is asking every believer to give up his life. What is Christ asking us to let go of? Our goals, our dreams, our ambitions, our burdens. We exchange them. Instead of pursuing our goals, we pursue Christ's. Instead of following our hearts, we follow Christ's heart. And finally, we exchange our worldly burdens for Christ's burden. But is that a good trade? I mean, we're still burdened, right? How could there be a good burden? Well, Paul writes about the difference between godly sorrow and worldly sorrow in 2 Corinthians when he says, worldly sorrow brings death, but godly sorrow brings repentance that leads to salvation and leaves no regret. So could there be burdens that come from the world and a burden that comes from Christ? Well, let's check this out. Another scene, Matthew, another gospel writer, talks about Jesus looking out at another crowd of people that look a little burnt out, a little fatigued, a little bit tired. And Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. And in Matthew chapter 11, verse 30, he says, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Notice that he doesn't say, come to me and you will have no burden. He says, come to me and I will put my yoke upon you. I will take your burdens and replace them with mine. The key I was looking for, the key to living the life Paul models for us, is accepting Jesus' invitation to lose our lives in him, to let go of worldly burdens and accept Christ's burden. Now, this isn't about, I'm not talking about salvation. Salvation is a different issue. Justification before God is a different issue. This is about the abundant life that Jesus promises, that he says he came here to give us. So this is answering the question, how do we do work for God without becoming so stressed and miserable that no one in their right mind would want what we have? I remember at one point justifying my own stress level by saying, well, yes, all the peace, joy, and love stuff, that's for the people who follow me. But I'm a leader in the church, so I don't get that. That's a lie. What burdens you? What are the worldly burdens that you carry? Do you have the burden of expectations? What you expect from yourself? What your parents expect from you after sending you to this school and paying all this money so you can not drink Diet Coke. What do they expect? Is that a burden you can let go of? Can you nail that to the cross? Can you walk away from it? Can you turn that expectation over to God? Do you expect yourself to be a big success? Do you expect to accomplish great things by the time you're 30? Do you expect to change the world in remarkable ways? All of those are worldly burdens. Can you let those go? Do you have the burden of outcomes? Do you want to accomplish X by Y period of time? That's something else I've had to let go of. I wanted to be the Christian Walt Disney. And I realized unless God specifically spoke to me and said, I want you to be the Christian Walt Disney, that was me talking, not God. That was my goal, not his. That said more about what I thought I needed to be happy than it did about what God was calling me to do. So I've taken those outcomes, what I wanted to do, what I wanted to accomplish, and nailed them to the cross and walked away from them. Burden of ego. Does anyone in here besides me have any ego? Okay. After the bankruptcy, all of the stuff that I had made was bought by a company called Classic Media in New York City. And they're what you would refer to as a bottom feeder in the entertainment industry. They buy distressed assets. They own Lassie, and they own Underdog, and they own Frosty the Snowman, and they own all of these assets that got into trouble, and then they bought them out of bankruptcy for the most part. They tried to buy the Muppets when the Muppets were in trouble, and then the Henson children actually came together to buy them themselves so they wouldn't end up in what they described as the character graveyard, which is where I said, thank you very much, that's where my characters are. I actually said that to the puppeteer who does Gonzo, Dave Gills. I met him at an event. He said, yeah, we had to work to keep them out of the character graveyard. And I said, thanks. Thanks, that's for all my children there. So after the bankruptcy, everything was sold to a company in New York, and then all the employees, about 20 of the employees were moved to Nashville, Tennessee, because apparently that's where all the Christians are supposed to live now. And so I flew to New York, and I met with the two guys who had bought it and said, okay, well, you know, you still need me, so I'll run it for you. I don't have to own it, but I'll run it. I'll keep being the CEO. And they said, we spent too much money buying it to let you run it. And I thought, oh, ouch. So I went back to Chicago, and I kind of got over that. I said, okay, well then I'll still be magnanimous, and I'll be nice, and I'll offer just to run the creative side. So I went back and said, okay, well I'll be the chief creative officer then. I'll just make sure that I'll be in charge of all the content. And the guy who is now running the company for them said, awkwardly, I just gave that responsibility to someone else. And I thought, oh, you really think you can do this without me? And then I got mad. Okay, we will see how well this goes. You try to do this without me, and I'm not going to lift a finger to help you, and when it all falls apart, don't come crying to me, because I'll say, I told you. And then I thought, wait, I'm following God now. I should pray about this. And I was going through the book of Jeremiah in my devotions, which, I'm not sure I ever actually read all the way through. It's long and Old Testament. So I'm reading through the book of Jeremiah, and there's a scene in it where Jeremiah writes a letter to the Israelites who've been carried off into exile. Okay, the Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar, has taken, like half of Israel and packed everybody up, taken all their precious things and carried away to Babylon, this pagan city. And I thought, that's what happened to me. All my precious things, my Bobs and my Larrys, have been packed up and carried away to Nashville, which is not pagan, but it's weird. And I thought, that's what happened to me. And I thought, okay, well Jeremiah, what advice are you going to give? Are you going to tell him to rise up against your oppressor and stick it to the man, and don't cooperate, and don't even do the voices for those Babylonians, and make them squirm? And Jeremiah writes and says, build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what they produce, marry and have sons and daughters, increase in number there, do not decrease. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. And I thought, oh, crap. You want me to help them. And so I took my ego and all these hurt feelings and all this want to get even with you, and I nailed it to the cross, and I went to them and said, all right, what do you want me to do? And they said, well, we'd like you to give notes on scripts and then keep doing voices. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And I said, but if I do that, could I just have, like, for every $1 that you make off the stuff that I created, could I have like 2 pennies? And they said, okay. And it turns out in the last 10 years, they've made a whole lot of dollars off what I created, and it turned into a lot of pennies. And everything I am doing now, from the puppets to teaching kids about the Bible to the websites we've launched, has been funded by those pennies I got because I swallowed my pride. And I realized if I hadn't been willing, if God hadn't used Jeremiah in his letter to make me willing to walk away from my ego, I would have completely missed out on his gift of sustenance for the next chapter of my ministry. Take your egos, nail them to the cross, and let them go. Do any of you carry burdens from childhood? No? Good, I'll move on. I'm from a very ambitious ministry family. My great-grandfather was one of the first radio preachers in America. He preached on the radio every Sunday morning from 1923 until 1963. My mother was playing the piano live on the radio when she was 5 years old, accompanying her little brother who was singing his first solo on live radio at age 3. I grew up in a parade of missionaries and amazing pillars of the faith that were either on my great-grandfather's radio show or at his Bible conference in Northwest Iowa. And I heard stories of these great men that did amazing things, and then women that went into jungles and swamps and carried the gospel to cannibals. By an uncle that was one of the first white men into a part of Erie and Jaya. And as a kid, I was hearing all these stories saying, what am I going to do that's special? What am I going to do that would make my great-grandfather proud? And that was a burden that drove me most of my life. Your value is your impact. It's kind of what I heard hanging around the Bible conferences. But there's something else that happened in my childhood that impacted me. I absolutely loved my dad. He was a creative. He's where I get my sense of humor and my storytelling. He's 75, and he writes Christmas dramas for his church to put on. And they have a bunch of retired people, many of whom would have hearing aids or bad knees, and they put on these Christmas dramas. In fact, their sound man has 2 hearing aids. It's too cute. It makes a great independent film. But it's true. And growing up, he would tell us all these amazing stories, and I just loved the guy. But then, he was in advertising. He ran the advertising for a tire company. And when I was like 7 years old, I loved what he did so much that I invented my own fictitious tire company so I could lay out ads for my own tire company. And then I would cut out stuff from his ads, and then I would paste it up for my own little Flight Tires, saves more money. That was my company, my own tire company when I was 7. Flight, that was a good name, wasn't it? Flight. It was F-L-I-T-E, because you could trademark that. You can't trademark it still. Normally. Anyway. I was very advanced for a 7-year-old. And then one day when I was 9, he came down the stairs with a suitcase in his hand, and he kissed me on the forehead, and he turned around and walked out the door. And immediately my life split into 2 halves. The half before my dad left, and the half after my dad left. Now I knew that marriage was hard. You know, my parents hadn't been smiling at each other very much for a couple of years. I'd heard them argue at night. So it was clear this marriage thing, it took work. It was not just easy, it was hard. But I saw my dad take a look at that hard work. And then I saw him look at me. And I saw him decide it wasn't worth it. And somewhere internally I took the message that I wasn't worth it, that I wasn't worth the hard work, that I wasn't worth hanging around for. And that message impacted the next 20 years of my life. It impacted my relationships. It impacted ultimately the work I did myself, my employees. So that even when VeggieTales was a huge success and I was getting calls from Newsweek and Time Magazine for interviews, there was always a little voice in my head saying, now am I worth it? Now am I worth hanging around for? And it took a lot of work, work that God did, input from people like my wife, to get to the point where I could hear God saying, you know, the thing that your dad did was really hard and painful. Can you let it go now? And can you take it to the cross? Can you nail it to the cross? Can you forgive him? And can you let it go? And that happened when I was about 25 years old. I was finally able to lay that burden down. So what is Christ's burden? Obedience. That's it. It's not about outcomes. It's not about ego. It's not about how much, how far, how fast, how big. Christ's burden is, what have I called you to do today, and are you doing it? And I learned that has as much to do with how I live out my faith to the girl who's bagging my groceries at the grocery store as it does with my big world-changing ministry. Christ is calling to you, to all you who are weary and burdened. Bring your burdens to the cross and lay them down. Let them go. Then stay there at the cross, resting in God's love. Not his love for the world in abstract, but his very real love for you. I'm back at work, launching new ideas, brainstorming new solutions, serving and ministering with the gifts I've been given. There are still days where I'll start to get stressed over my plans, my schedules, my budgets, and stress will start creeping up my legs like a virus, reminding me that while I am created in the image of God, I still bear the marks of a fallen humanity. But in those moments, I go back to the words of Paul. I go back to the cross. I go back to the purity of my burden for those two little girls and their moms staring down a horribly messy world. I let go of that stress and put my plans and schedules and budgets in God's hands. And once again, with Paul, can say, rejoice. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. We have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. So rejoice. Again, I say, rejoice. That's the story I want to tell. That obviously leads to more questions. And what we're going to do now is just talk about it. More questions. What do you want to know? We're having Q&A time. We have a microphone? Where's my... Hey, yeah, you have a mic. I must say a snappy outfit. Oh, I'm really thirsty. There's water. There's water, okay. All right, who has a question? I assume you all want to do things for God in some measure or another, and that's kind of what I feel like my calling is now, is to help people that are getting started to figure out how to approach that in a healthy, God-centered way. So, what do you want to know? And if you just want me to do another voice, that's okay.
Well, I don't know, it's been a real struggle for me trying to figure out what God wants me to do. So I guess the big thing is, how did you know, like, the defining line? And I guess how would I know, or how would anybody know the defining line of when it's what you want to do and it's what God wants you to do? And also, can you do a voicemail message for me, Bob the Tomato or something?
Yeah, talk to me later. Like tomorrow.
It's worth a try.
Yeah, okay. That's the mic back there. That's a really good question. How do you know when it's God's idea and not your idea? The biggest issue is, the first thing I'll ask someone when they come to me burning with passion for this thing they want to do, And they want help. How do I do this? Help me get started. Point me to the money. Make it go for me. And usually my first question is, are you willing to live without it? Would you be okay? What does it do to you emotionally if I said that thing will never happen? If you can get to the point where you are fine without it, then I say, okay, let's start pursuing it. Let's walk in that direction. But don't start walking in that direction while you're holding it like this. Because what I'm really trying to get kids to do is to learn how to hold things loosely. Because ideas are, a word you use, fungible. Ideas they're temporary. There's a million of them. Ideas are cheap. People are infinitely valuable. And we tend, especially if we're ambitious, we focus more on ideas than on people. And we miss the people around us because the number of people that have hurt the people they care about the most for the sake of a dream they were pursuing is staggering. I love to remind people that Hitler had a dream. Hitler was following his dream. He was following his heart, because the Bible tells us that the heart is deceitful and wicked above all things. Who can trust it? So you can't tell me, oh no, he was just misunderstood, or that wasn't really a dream. His dreams are supposed to be good. No, that's Disney. That's not reality. Hey, oh, then you are still like the best. Thank you so much. You want me to leave a message on your phone? So how do you find what God wants you to do? God speaks to us through our wiring. I would make a terrible missionary because I am so introverted and I get so worn out by trying to socialize one-on-one with people. I don't do people well. I do audience pretty well, but that's different than people. So I'd like to talk to all of you. I'm not crazy about talking to any one of you. Don't take it the wrong way. It's really a compliment. But my wiring, in fact, if I had been more aware of how God created me, I would have known that me trying to build and run a large company was absolutely a terrible idea. Because that's not me. I'm not wired. I didn't go to any social events in high school. I was not on student government. I didn't go to the prom. I went to one football game, and that was it. And it was the year we won the state championship. That's how social I am. Where was I? I was in the basement taking apart Super 8mm projectors trying to build a two-headed beam-splitting optical printer. That should have been a clue. And if anyone, if I had gotten to know people well enough, they probably would have said, don't try to build a company. That's not going to go well. Get yourself in a position where you can do what you do better than anyone else. And surround yourself with other people that can do what you don't do and do it better than you do it, and partner with them and let God form these little teams of cooperation. But it starts with what has God wired you to be better at than anyone else that you know? Because that's a clue. He doesn't give you amazing gifts and then call you to do something that uses none of them. And we're afraid he will. He's going to make me go to Africa and counsel people, one-on-one in Swahili. I don't even speak Swahili. No, he made me, I see films in my head and have all my whole life. And not just because they're Disney films that I saw earlier and I remember them, on new films that don't exist. And that's a huge clue as to how God wired me. And when I put myself in a position to respond to that wiring, I told somebody that asked me a couple of days ago, they want to do something, they haven't been using their creative gifts at all, they're 25, they think maybe that God wants them to produce graphic novels, but every time they start and think about the immensity of getting a book produced, they freak out and give up. And my advice to him was, don't focus on that outcome, produce graphic novels. Focus on the activity you draw. God wired you to be an illustrator and a storyteller. Every evening, spend an hour drawing. Drawing in the direction of a graphic novel, but not worrying about the outcome of a graphic novel. Oh, I finished it. If you Focus on the activity that God has wired you for. He will steer you into the outcomes that He wants. Because He never called me to build the next Disney. He called me to tell stories. I'm a storyteller. Focus on the activity, not on the outcome. And God will lead you to the outcome. Does that help? Okay. But start. Start. What I do now, because I had someone, after I gave my talk somewhere about how, I'm letting go of my dreams. Some people, just because we're so wired in America to dream for everything, like every financial services ad on TV right now says, this is, follow your dream, will help you find your dream. Hang on tight to your dream, never let go of your dream. It's like dreams are our children, and our children are just things that get in the way of our dreams. So when I talk about, man, you're really messing up my dream path. Tanya Harding had a dream. Do you know who Tanya Harding is? She was second for the gold medal in figure skating in 90-something. She wanted to win the gold medal in figure skating. And that was her dream, and we tell our little girls when they're kids, follow your dreams and you can make it all come happy. And we put little shiny rainbows and stickers on their dream kits and their folders, and then follow your dreams. So Tanya Harding wants to stand there with the gold medal in figure skating. So what does she do to make her dream come true? She hires a thug to whack her main competitor in the ankles with a wrench. Nancy Kerrigan, who actually won the gold medal, she paid a guy to hit her in the knees with a wrench to try to knock her out of the Olympics. Never let go of your dreams. You'll never be happy without them. But your competitor may walk better if you would let go of your dreams. And that's what I'm getting. So this guy wrote me and said, you sound sad. He said, you sound like you've given up. Don't be afraid to dream. Impossible dream. And I wrote him back and said, first of all, I have lots of ideas. I haven't stopped brainstorming. I have lots of ideas, but the minute I take one of them and start calling it my dream, I'm holding on to it too tightly. I have elevated it above people, above God. Just the way we use the word dream. People say, but in the Bible, people have dreams. Yeah, and they're asleep or in a trance. Okay, when you got your dream to win the gold medal in figure skating, which one of those two were you? Were you asleep or were you in a trance? No, that's not what I mean by dream. Exactly, that's not the biblical dream. The cultural interpretation of dream is really a strong desire. The biblical definition of dream is divine revelation given while in a state of sleep or a sleep-like trance. Those are two very, very different things. No one in the Bible ever says, I have a dream. They always say, I had a dream. It was 2 nights ago while I was sleeping. Here's what my dream was. If you say, I have a dream that God gave me, you're already using completely unbiblical language. That's not what a dream is in the Bible. What you're saying is, I have an idea that I think God gave me. I'm hoping it's from God because I really, really like it. And that's where I immediately say, would you be okay if it never, ever happens? And that the immediate look on someone's face, they usually go, tells you how high that idea has been elevated, to a point, I think, of idolatry. So isn't that encouraging? So I got disinvited to a Christian conference. It's only happened once. It was kind of fun. So I said, I've heard, people are really talking a lot about how much they like, your speaking. I want you to come speak at my conference. I said, great, I'd be happy to. He said, but do you have any different talks? And what do you mean? I said, well, I heard your main talk, and you kind of rag on dreams. Do you have any other talks you could give? And I said, well, no, I think it's kind of important. That's kind of what God has put me here to do now, is to let people know when they're hanging on to things too. He said, yeah, but the problem is I have another part of my ministry that's called Year of Dreams, and we're encouraging Christians to follow their dreams. He's like, awkward. And that led to a fairly long conversation because it's a pretty big, well-known conference where, okay, when you use the word dream, what do you mean? And what he came back and said was, a dream is an idea that God has given you, or a desire that God has given you. Where in the Bible are you getting that definition? It's not in the Bible. That's never how the word is used in the Bible. And so when I ended up actually speaking at the conference, and I tried to tone down my anti-dream rhetoric a little bit for his benefit, but I was pretty strong with him to say, if you are preaching dreams that way, before you preach, you need to say, this is how I'm defining the term dream. And it's not the biblical definition or the cultural definition. The cultural definition is anything I really, 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 really want. A pony, a wife, world domination. A nuclear warhead. You know, anything that you really, 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 really want is a dream. Okay, is that biblical? Is that how we decide what God's will is, based on whatever we desire? Have we completely lost the notion that we're fallen people and that our desires are part of our fallen nature? And that just because I want that lady over there and I'm married to that one doesn't necessarily mean that's from God? So, anyway, okay. Another question. Yes, sir. You can't talk.
Oh.
Whoa!
Good morning. Okay, so I would like to know where the nameless character who is the head of the band of thieves and the, who's my neighbor thing, where did that come from? Does he actually have a name?
No.
Okay. And also, how did your children react to VeggieTales? Like, did they, were they anything like all their friends, or were they like, oh yeah, that's just my dad's voice type thing?
Yeah, okay, I'll take those three guys were initially, they showed up first, actually in the very first DVD, Where's God When I'm Scared, in the story of Daniel. They were the three wise men that consulted with King Darius. So I didn't give them names. I said wise man number 1, wise man number 2, wise man number 3. And then they showed up in number 2, Are You My Neighbor, in the story of the Good Samaritan, and they played 3 bandits, and they were called Bandit number 1, Bandit number 2.
The numerical trio.
And that just kept going, because they almost always showed up as a trio, and we just changed the name to, singer number 1, singer number 2, singer number 3.
Yeah, I remember that.
And so we got to, as it was like 10 years later when we did, what's the name of that? High So Cat. High So Cat, which was great, was written by one of our animators. Really great, silly song. I just thought it was hilarious that he just wanders out like he's depressed. I've been in every show since number 1 and I still don't have a name. That's his sorry self across the stage. And he still doesn't have a name. Typically they'll be referred to as like bandit number 1. Bandit number, wise man number,
Number 1.
Like thing 1 and thing 2 is Dr. Seuss. Second question, my kids, when they were really little, they liked to come to the office to see all the creative stuff, because you put artists together and really bizarre stuff goes up on the walls. So they like that. One of our artists who now it teaches at Christian College, teaches design, had a tie collection, a weird tie collection. He had the most bizarre ties, like hundreds of them. And so they actually hung them all and made a wall of ties for the design department that you had to walk through to get into the design, which we started referring to as Thailand. So my kids love to come in and see all the goofy stuff, and somebody had a weird food collection and all sorts of toys and stuff. They like that. They like the shows, but they would see them early and often and get tired of them quickly. So by the time that one was actually released in stores, they were already like, I don't care. Don't want to see it again. Then they discovered at some point that if they told their friends about it, their friends would go, and they thought that was pretty cool. So then suddenly they'd run up to me with a friend and say, "Do Bob!" She wants to hear you do Bob. And now they're in, 2 are in high school and one's out of college and married. And I'll do chapel at their high school, it's a Christian high school in Chicago. And I'll be a chapel speaker, and they kind of like that. Wow, your dad's really cool. My dad sells insurance. Another question? Yes, you can either yell or we can. Where's Mr. Snappy? Oh, way back there. Sorry, he's got his mic by Mr. Snappy.
I was the guy who asked the original question. Anyways, I have neither a question nor a request for a voice. I have a solution for your Diet Coke thing.
Yeah, okay, what am I about to secret?
Okay, my dad drinks regular Coke, and he had an employee who was a really health nut type of guy.
Yeah.
And so he'd always say that carrot juice is better. So one day my dad came to work and said, this isn't a Coke, it's carrot juice. So you, instead of calling it Diet Coke or regular Coke, you just call it carrot juice.
So it's the lying you're saying? I think your solution solves one problem. So please send it for theological advice.
Somebody give us information.
Another question? Yes. Oh, Domo. Domo has a question. Rock on. I have a Domo shirt.
I love Domo.
Not on.
Good question.
Yeah.
What is your favorite VeggieTales episode?
I like different ones for different reasons. I really like David and Giant Pickle because it was the first one that was easily produced without anyone dying. Because the early ones threw up all nightmares and you stagger across the finish line and say, I never want to see this again. And so after Rat Shack and Benny, I made too big of a jump in complexity from the last one. Rat Shack and Benny almost killed us. We barely got it out. It was a mess. And I still watched it scale mistakes. And so I thought, I'm going to write a really simple one. I'm going to write a really simple one. This cannot happen again. And I wrote David the Giant Pickle. And it went so well. And it was so fun to make. And it came together nicely, and I really like it. So that's one of my favorites. I said earlier, talking to the film students, that I really like the Christmas and Easter specials. That were the last things I wrote before the bankruptcy, the Star of Christmas and an Easter Carol. If you take them as bookends, which is how they were meant. Basically say you can't have Christmas without Easter, and you can't have Easter without Christmas. They go together. And that was the first place I thought I could, in an appropriate way, tell the story of Jesus in a VeggieTales episode. My mother teaches children's ministry at Wheaton College at the grad school, and she also worked for David C. Cook writing Sunday school curriculum. So when I first started, she was still David C. Cook. I came to her with the idea. I said, I want to do vegetables that tell Bible stories. Rise up and call me blessed. And she said, okay, rule number 1, you will not portray Jesus as a vegetable. Okay, there go the Gospels. Rule number 2, you will not imply in any way that vegetables can have redemptive relationships with Jesus. Okay, that's why Bob and Larry never pray on the countertop. If they ever pray in a VeggieTales episode, it's when they're pretending to be a biblical character. Because vegetables don't have relationships with God. They're vegetables. Okay, now how many gospel puppet shows have you seen where Mr. Lion accepts Jesus as his personal savior? That may be effective for children, but it is highly theologically questionable. We don't do that in VeggieTales, we're very careful. And then third, she says, as often as you can, remind kids how special they are and how much God loves them. What? Remember, kids, God made you special, and He loves you very much. We were oft criticized for not doing the Gospels, for Jesus never showing up in VeggieTales. And, so most of them I wrote back and said, how exactly do you want me to portray Jesus? It's not because we're avoiding him, it's because we cannot vegetabilize him. And then when I wrote Star of Christmas, the idea hit me to tell the story of Jesus in human form in the stained glass windows of the church. So it was looking for a context where we could portray Jesus in human form in a vegetable world, which is bizarre from the get-go. But we were in a church, and we did it in the stained glass windows, and we animated the stained glass windows to bring them to life, and it worked great. So that's why I like that one so much. You and then you. Yes, you can just shout and I'll repeat the question. Or take that.
At one point, Larry said, Bob, they got arms. Where did those penguins come from?
3, 2, 1, penguins.
Yeah.
Yeah. How many people remember 3, 2, 1 Penguins? Wow. Why didn't it sell better?
I got one.
Big idea started exploding. We went from 30 people to 150 in about 18 months. Which was monstrously hard to manage. I brought in an executive team, which were people that had worked for places like Motorola and Kraft and Price Waterhouse, and so they're all like, let's have meetings, oh, make it bigger, faster, more. And this was an important point. If you're working with business people, beware type A males. The world of business is awash with type A males. 1,000 years ago, they would be Napoleon, Hitler. No, Hitler wasn't 1,000 years ago. Type A males like to conquer things, and they're very aggressive. And type A males do not have a great deal of respect for anyone who is not a type A male. In other words, they don't want to follow a non-type A male. I, Exhibit A, not a type A male. I was in the basement taking apart the projectors. I was not dominating the world. So I hired type A males because it's like, these guys are really aggressive. We will build the Christian Disney and save the children from Satan. And charge! I could not leave them to save my life, because they're like alpha dogs, and you put 5 alpha dogs in the room and they all start sniffing each other to see who's the biggest alpha dog. And if you're not the biggest alpha dog, I'm not listening to you, and I don't smell like an alpha dog, so nobody wanted to follow me, and that turned into... What was your question? You asked me to explain alpha dogs?
The penguins.
Oh, penguins! So they came in, all right, and suddenly someone came out with this. We need to show people that we're not a one-trick pony. That statement started getting bandied around by the executives. If we only have VeggieTales, we look like a one-trick pony. We ought to show people that we're not a one-trick pony, like. So apparently one-trick ponies are really bad. Note to self. Sell your one-trick pony. No future in one-trick ponies. Don't tell George Lucas this. I'm saying it can actually work out pretty well if the pony has a great trick. So there was an effort to say, we need something else. VeggieTales plus, we need a sophomore product. We need the next hit album. What's next? And I didn't have anything. I was like, I like Bob and Larry. I think we don't take them places. And I was trying to make a movie. I wanted to make Jonah at that point. And no, we need something else to go along. So now we're one-trick pony. Everyone thinks one-trick ponies. And so we were working with some other Christian creatives who had a really cool show. And we thought, well, maybe we'll bring their show in. So we did a deal with them to produce their show. And then we got into creative differences, and they changed their minds and wanted their show back. And we said, well, technically you did a deal to give us the show. And they said, well, what if we made a new show that you could do, and then we traded them like a hostage swap? And so they came back and said, all right, penguins in space. And there were like a zillion of them. They all had very similar names, and they were identical. We thought, okay, maybe there's something in there, and we kind of wanted to do the Christian thing and actually let them have their show back. So we said, okay, we'll swap you, Penguins in Space, for your show. They took their show, and we took this Penguins in Space idea, and then we had a fair number of creatives on staff at that point, so we developed it and actually turned it into a fun little show. The goal was to make it for about half of what we were making VeggieTales for, because VeggieTales had gotten pretty expensive, and that's where we miserably failed. We couldn't figure out how to make things more cheaply, but we rented the Kennedy Space Center for the launch. It was really cool. We had a big event. We had like 1,200 Christian radio stations that all promoted it for us. So it got off to a great start. It was the biggest launch, I think, of any kids product in Christian market history. But it just didn't grow. So they were lovely. And then someone else had a question. Who was by you or beyond you? Oh, you! Yes!
So what was the background and inspiration for
second show, I parodied Gilligan's Island. Third show, I parodied Star Trek. So I started looking down the road at what else would it be fun to put Bob and Larry into. And I thought, Batman. You know, I think it was when Tim Burton's Batman was out. And it was so fun that really, over serious, dark tone to do Bob and Larry. And so I conceived Bat Bob and Larry Boy initially. And so it would be Bob being Batman and Larry Boy basically being Robin, his sidekick. And that idea sat on the back shelf for about a year. And then I did, was it Dave the Giant Pickle, where Larry Boy first shows up? But it was one of those where on the countertop. Yeah, it was about not feeling like you could do big things. And so he wants to be a superhero. And so I pulled out the Larry Boy idea from Bat Bob and Larry Boy and put him on the countertop. And that's when I designed his little suit and his suction cup ears. And he says, I'm a Larry-go-round. And it just seemed to click. There was just something about Larry playing against type to that degree and like putting on this persona of, I'm a tough guy. You know, like, okay, we should do more with this. So then Bat Bob just was completely forgotten. Like, no, Bob, you're fine. You wouldn't play along with this anyway. We all know that. You wouldn't do that. So that's where Larry Boy came from. And kids liked him, so we made another one. Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious, when did you meet your wife, and did she work with you, and is she an extrovert?
When did I meet my wife? Did she work with me? Is she an extrovert? I met her at my great-grandfather's Bible conference. Her uncle, my denomination is the Christian Missionary Alliance, which is a relatively small denomination that was about, originally it was several denominations sending missionaries together out of New York City in the 1880s. And then, like most things, they say this will never be its own denomination, and boom, the next morning it's its own denomination. So her uncle was also in the Christian Missionary Alliance and was on the board of directors of my great-grandfather's Bible conference. So my dad left when I was 9. My wife's dad left when she was 12. So we were both raised by single moms. Her uncle invited her mom to come to the Bible conference when Lisa was a junior in high school. And I was 20. I had just gotten kicked out of Bible college. I was kicked out, kids. It's okay. There was no moral issues. I failed chapel. You don't show up often enough because you're staying up late writing funny puppet scripts and chasing the night watchman around with puppets.
Yeah, the safety.
Nothing morally questionable, just important. So I had, and I met her. And there are very few, in my history of Bible conferences, you bump into very few girls with sarcasm. Because girls in Bible conferences tend to be pretty straight-laced. And I was really sarcastic at that time. And so was she. And I thought, this is interesting. A Bible conference girl with sarcasm. And then I found out she was going to Wheaton College the next year as a vocal performance major. I thought, I live in Wheaton. This is divine. So came to Wheaton College. That's how we met. She was a vocal performance major, and when Mike and I were sitting down to record the first voices, I asked Mike if he could come up with a voice for Larry, and I was going to do a voice for Bob, and then we had made Junior. And I thought, where am I going? I can't do a voice for Junior. Mike can't do a voice for Junior. Since we're post-pubescent. And Lisa said, can I try? And I thought, this is fraught with peril. My wife, who just got married, wants to audition for a role in my film. What do I do? And I was like, oh, I don't know if that's such a... It's okay if you don't like it. You don't have to use it. It's okay. I won't be offended. And so she steps up to the mic, and she talks, and it was Junior, instantly. So she's Junior. It's been Junior ever since. And her mom actually said, because we had her audition for other roles, and she had no other characters. And it's like, this is my character. This is all I got. And her mom actually said she's been doing that voice all her life. Now the irony is, she at one point had dreamed of, she wanted to be the next Aunt Patty, she wanted to move to Nashville and cut CDs and tour and stuff. And we got married and had a child immediately, and that kind of, whoop. She's actually won 3 Dove Awards as a 6-year-old asparagus.
Boy, 6-year-old.
She also co-writes, she co-wrote the VeggieTales theme song. She and I co-wrote the, so we have learned to fly to life. And so she writes music as well. And then her kids all. So right now we're not actively working together, you know, and you realize it's probably a season, maybe it'll happen again, maybe it won't. Let God figure that out. Yes? Who's my favorite character to perform? I usually have the most fun with Mr. Lunt. Because for some reason, because when we're recording in the booth, they'll often let me just go off and ad-lib. Bob cannot ad-lib because he has to be the serious, theologically correct one all the time. So, like, I'll do a live radio interview, and they say, hey, can we interview Bob the Tomato? And I'll say, you don't want to interview him. That's like interviewing Mr. Rogers. You know? It's not going to be very funny. Interview Mr. Lunt. And, you know, so improvising is Mr. Lunt. He can get away with things that amaze me on Christian radio. Did I really just say that on Christian radio and nobody even minded? You know? What a wonderful world. So he's cool. I also like, there's a lot of meat in Archibald asparagus. Both because I'm a big Monty Python fan, and also because when I was like 8 years old, my sister chased me with worms, not the other way around. Which probably tells you I should not have gone out for 7th grade football. And that was 2 weeks. And then 7th grader, I have a huge head. I have a really big head. All Vischers have really big heads. So they couldn't find a helmet that fit me. That was a tiny little 7th grader with this massive head. So they finally found this like old helmet that had the bulges on the ears that they stopped using 10 years earlier. Like, oh, it fits him. You know, it was like a lollipop. 2 weeks. It only took 2 weeks. 2-hour practices, 7th grade, August, heat, full pads, little lollipop, creative, shy kid. And I remember literally thinking these words, no game is worth this! I turned and walked away. I never returned. And Archibald would have done the same thing. I would be playing the Scrabble right now. Why am I wasting my time with this barbarism? Any more questions? Yes? Oh, now everyone has a question all of a sudden. Okay, you.
The newer VeggieTales, they seem to be moving away from the Bible theme to like fairy tales. Do you have any input in the script?
The new veggies are moving away from Bible themes to like fairy tales. Do I have any input in the scripts? No, I don't. Some people read more into that than there is. First of all, they've really run out of easy-to-tell Bible stories. There are only so many Bible. The whole Bible does not make a good children's film. Not every story makes a good children's film. You know, there's content, but then there's also just like the drama. You know, there's something exciting happen at the end that makes a third act. So most of the easy Bible stories that work well for turning into a retelling as a film with vegetables have already been told. They're actually just trying to come up with anything that people will like. You know, they're very open to input. So write them a letter and say, the last Bible story they did was Abe and the Big Promise, and it actually sold very, very poorly. So they've had better sales with. And then they've now fallen in, because it's marketing driven now. It's like, you know, survey says, focus group says, oh, they want girl. Okay, we'll do princess. Yeah, so they're doing princess ones in pink packaging, and then, oh, boys want superheroes, so another Larry Boy thing. You know, so it's kind of backwards. But a lot of entertainment is that way. Do a focus group and see if the audience can tell us what we should make. Which is what happens when you don't. That's what happened at Disney after Walt died. It's what happened at Henson after Jim Henson died. You know, if someone doesn't have a vision for what they should be making, marketing takes over and does surveys. And that's usually the beginning of the end. Yes.
I haven't known this, but are VeggieTales, are they translated into a different language?
They're in Portuguese, they're in Spanish, some of them are in Japanese. There isn't a discernible Christian retail market in very many countries, and typically in non-English countries, even fewer. So it's hard to justify the expense of the translation. There are ministries that will, like Superbook with CBN, they translate it into a zillion languages because they're entirely donor supported, and so they don't actually have to make any money. They can lose money on everything they do, when you're donor supported. And because we were never donor supported, we couldn't afford to lose money, which we ultimately did. And that's why I'm here. But so we couldn't afford. We're trying to do Spanish on What's in the Bible, my new series, and even that, it's like, wow, this is expensive. How are we going to sell them? Where are the Spanish Christian bookstores that will buy them? We're looking for those. Okay, last question. Last question. What? Well, people are leaving. Look how bored they are. They're like, they're fleeing. They're fleeing. Was it the Diet Coke? Sorry. Not where I was. Okay. Yes?
I was wondering if you have a primary source of reference for what's in the Bible. And also, I don't think you use a voice for a scooter, but you have an impersonation in your scooter.
It's hard to do my scooter impersonation now because I'm doing an Irish pirate in What's in the Bible. And so I immediately go there, and you end up getting Captain Pete the pirate from What's in the Bible. I don't know what's in the Bible, but I sure hope we can figure it out. So that was pretty close to my scooter. Source of reference for theology for What's in the Bible, primarily my ESV study Bible and my NIV study Bible. I use those side by side. And the reason I use those is because I know that anything that's in there has been thoroughly vetted by about a zillion different, So I'm not, what I avoid is someone saying, hey, I just heard this thing about Revelation and it's really interesting. You should put it in What's in the Bible. And I have no idea where that came from. Then when we started, we were working with Tyndale House, which publishes the Living Bible, and so their Bible department went over each script and kind of combed them and made sure I was not committing heresy, which I appreciate. Now we're not working with Tyndale anymore, but we have a team, my mom at Wheaton College, another Bible theologian at Wheaton College. There's a group that we use that does research basically for megachurch pastors who are too busy to do their own research for their sermons. So there's a little industry of researchers who support megachurch pastors. And we use one of those groups to research every episode. So it starts with me and some commentaries and study Bibles and ends up with a team of about 6 people that then search for heresy. All right, any questions more funny to end on? Oh, his hand is so much higher than yours.
Where did Silly Songs with Larry come from?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. We'll end on that. Where does Silly Songs with Larry come from? Again, it's the Monty Python thing. It's the, and now for something completely different. I think that was the basic idea. So it was the very first show. And as I was working on that show, I was still working at the Post House where I was developing it in my spare time, the video production house in Chicago, downtown Chicago. It was April. I had to go down to the federal building to get tax forms, pre-internet. I mean, that sounds so hilarious now. I have to drive to the federal building in downtown Chicago to get a tax form, you print it. On the internet. And so I had a handful of tax forms, and I was walking across the Dirksen Federal Building Plaza in downtown Chicago to get back on the bus to go back to my job. And out of the blue, I started singing, "Everybody's got a water buffalo." I have no idea where it came from. Tax forms, federal building, bus, water buffalo. And I thought, well, that's kind of fun. So I sang it in my head all the way back to my office, because I don't read or write music, so I have to record everything. Now I do it on my phone. Again, phone in your pocket? What? This was like 1992. And so I came all the way back and then just recorded it. Everybody got a water flow, that's fun. Okay, maybe that could be just like a commercial break. in the middle. So then I said, okay, let's have an announcer, kind of a Monty Python style, which I would call the classic British golf commentator. He is approaching the 4th tee. Okay, I want that kind of voice, so I figured out what to do. And now it's time for city songs with Eddie. After the show, Eddie comes out and sings a city song. And so I did that. We did the Water Buffalo song, and people really liked it. The second video, I didn't do another silly song. I actually did, it's called the Forgive-O-Matic. It was like a commercial break. It was actually a puppet script I'd written in Bible college before I got kicked out. And Mike and I had done it as a puppet script. And so we did that one. That came out, immediately we got letters. What happened to Silly Song Glory? What is this no longer Silly Song Glory? You know, it's like, hey, when did I promise you a on every show? And then we said, well, that's what they want. So then I said, Mike, because Mike doesn't write big, long stories as well as I do, but he comes up with short, little, hilarious things much better than I do. I have a hard time coming up with anything that doesn't teach something. I'm just very teaching motivated, so I don't do random acts of comedy very much. Mike does that really well. So I said, Mike, can you try to do another silly song with Larry? He said, all right, I'll think about it. And he came in a few days later to my office and said, so I was in the shower. And I couldn't find my razor. And I started singing, oh, where is my razor? Oh, where is my razor? And I said, Mike, fun song. We don't want kids running around the house. And you get pissed yet. Oh, you're so fun. And I said, well, can you think of something else besides razor that would work? And so let me go think about it. And he went away. And he came back like an hour later. Said, what about hair brush? Bing! And then Mike took over the silly songs and wrote pretty much all of them. So I wrote the Water Buffalo song, and then I got out of the silly song business, because that was like my single act of random humor without a teaching intent. But even with that, people try to interpret it theologically. This is a Christian video, so there must be a theological Water Buffalo represents theology, clearly heretical. The cheeseburger song, Mike decided he wanted to do a 1970s rock power ballad. I'm always pulling him back to the edge of the inappropriate. He actually did one silly song that I have on my phone because it got recorded but never released, called Sippy Cup. It turned into a different version later on, but it was basically a heavy metal song with Mr. Lunch singing about sippy cups. And it was headbanging, heavy metal, and it was after I was gone, so it was the new owners and the new management, and he played it for them, ta-da! And they were like, So then he came to me and he said, hey, Phil, I don't think they like it because they didn't hear how funny it would be with Mr. Lunt singing it. So could you record a demo of this, and then I'll try it again. I don't think so. Okay, so I recorded Mr. Lunt singing this head-banging sippy cup song. He went and missed it again. No. Then he came back and he said, no. What if Junior said, would you have Lisa record a demo? That would be so cute. I think they'd go for it. They still didn't go for it. But I do have on my phone Junior singing the headbanging. Still don't know what he's singing. So anyway, we came back, so we're listening to, again, if I mention the name of a film, I am not endorsing the film. If I mention the name of a band, I am not endorsing the band. We were listening to a lot of Meatloaf in the office. And some of those crazy, sappy power ballads of the 70s. And Mike wanted to write one, so he wrote the Cheeseburger song, which I will perform a little bit for you to end our glorious Christ-honoring time together.